Morning.
Buenos.
Editor-in-Chief of Portfolio from Colombia. So we're going to continue with the program, and I'm in charge of moderating this session, which is going to be in Spanish. So it's going to be channel number 1. It's my understanding. You'll have the equipment over there. De tal manera que bienvenido.
So welcome all. For me, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to the CCA for having invited us. And without further ado, let's listen regulators talking about the regulation in 5 key countries in Latin America. We will have Judy Castañeda from Peru virtually. She will be with us. So without further ado, I would like to ask each of the panelists to give us a general view of what is happening on the side of regulation in each of their countries. Let's start from left to right. First of all, with Ms. Passos from Brazil. Good morning. In Brazil, the matter is still open in the sense that we are at a moment where we have two proposals on the table, in the sense that things are not regulated cultivation-wise. And in Brazil, we open the possibility to have medical and scientific use, but as to regulation, we cannot arrive to that. People who use it today by importation from different countries, from Canada, the US, but this is a personal import. So people import it under prescription. There's no national production, nor is there growth there. So there's been proposals that have been studied for more than 3 years, and they're studying all the growth and wanting to assimilate what's been happening in Canada, and also things based on legislation of other countries that have had experience before us, and also in specific issues so that the medicinal use of registered medications can take place. So the same tests have to happen as for other medications. This is a vision whereby more natural products, artisanal products, are not under the mandate of the agency. The agency is very focused on medicinal issues that have to do with tests that have been taking place for years. And the regulatory authority where I work, Anvisa, knows the pharmaceutical market, and so its mandate is therefore focused not on the possibility of exploring other sides of things, but rather to talk about regulation. We are very focused in the making possible access to these products in a safe manner. So there's been a public consultation for a specific period of time. Things have been received, and now we are in the consolidation phase, which means to say that we're going to see how things are reflected in the final text, so the board of directors can have a conversation. So that's the scenario where we are. Thank you very much. Now, let's listen to Alberto Ruiz from Mexico. Hello. Thank you for everybody, for Marta, for Ricardo, for being the moderator. The issue in Mexico is that since 2017, we have a medicinal regulation that has not been consolidated due to a lack of practical regulations, where to grow, where to import the plant form. And this has not been authorized yet for people to have access to medicinal cannabis. cannabis, as we call it. Now, users who are the promoters of all of this, mostly for therapy for children that have epilepsy and things have been before the court, have brought about to the fact that the Supreme Court told Congress that this legislative period should establish a period until October of this year to have a comprehensive regulation of cannabis with 5 articles of the general law of health. Now, there are 7 elements in court establishing mostly the right to personal use, the right to equality before the law for all citizens, to be able to have access to this, to have the right to health. We have the right to use a tattoo, well, then we should have the right to recreational cannabis. And the current Minister of Internal Affairs in Mexico proposed a bill where we're talking about trade, and we're trying to talk about commercial access to cannabis. Now, the conversation today at Parliament and in Congress concretely includes 2 issues. First of all, to have a sanitary regulation that already exists in the country to differentiate psychotropics from non-psychotropics. Psychotropics have a treatment as such. So there has to be either a medical prescription from a physician and also for there to be a mechanism for access to have medical access. Now, the non-psychotropics, which means that there can be used as food or for cosmetics, use that does not imply a prescription, but that is a medical prescription, such as a cream, for example, that can help for as an anti-inflammatory, for example. So that's a medical conversation, and we have a regulator already, like in Colombia, for example. And in Mexico, it's called COFEPRIS, and that organization is a federal organization that has to have all and uses cannabis and its derivatives. Now, the issue always is that this legislation always has had to do with a plant, and the plant as such has certain derivatives, THC and CBD, and this makes for the regulation to be complex in Mexico, because it's as if we would regulate tomatoes, for example. Tomatoes have the possibility to be used for ketchup, for example, or not. So we want to find the properties that are necessary for ketchup, and we need to have sanitary issues regulated. That's the conversation in Congress. Access that have to do with different initiatives that want to create this access and the growth, and part of the conversation has to be with how many plants would be grown, for example. That's where we're at in Mexico. We, of course, have not concluded the conversation, but in October, we are meant to have complete regulation. Thank you very much. And now, from Uruguay, Mr. Rodriguez. The situation in 2013, a ley was approved that established the conditions to grow and distribute cannabis for all uses possible. So we have an inclusive regulatory system, and in the case of Uruguay, the issue is that the implementation of this public policy agenda started for non-medicinal use of cannabis, and the next year it was open for domestic growth and also for a membership of small companies. The third way to have access to cannabis started mid-2017, and it's the production and distribution by private companies and the distribution to users that are registered through the network of pharmacies that have licenses to dispense cannabis for medicinal purposes. Now, what this gave more visibility to what happened in Uruguay, and that has put our country at the front with colleagues of other parts of the world, and it will continue to be so. And also because from another perspective, it's unavoidable that we must talk about issues having to do with medicinal, industrial use and different industrial issues having to do with science, without the scheme of access and control, without putting that in the regulatory conversation. So it seems to me that the situation in Uruguay is special in that sense, and we are working today on developing the conditions in order to have a good implementation of access systems to medicinal cannabis. There are certain labs in Uruguay that have registered certain products with different concentrations of CBD, but there are no medications yet, no medical usage for THC or other elements. And in the pharmacies, it would be interesting to present the situation. Currently, the efforts on the regulatory side are very important, and we can see efforts in the matter of developing applications, and we are focusing on that. There are about 60 companies that have authorization for psychoactive cannabis and more companies for non-psychoactive usage, and this is in order to develop different processes of research to include in this production chain. And our challenge really is the one, to put it clearly, our challenge is to maintain the scheme of regulation and application of that regulatory scheme that is constantly evolving. So regulation changes reality. It creates conditions to take even more decisions, and also in order to adjust different modules of this working scheme. This is the situation currently in my country. And currently in Parliament, in fact, there's a conversation, bill related to the promotion of scientific research for the use of cannabis. And there's public funding for this in great measure. And the bill says that part of this initial fund would come from what we can obtain from the licenses for cannabis growth. The other project has to do with the diversification and the development of awareness in patients as to the products that we have in cannabis. And there's also a conversation about that in Parliament. This is a special moment, we should say, because like in Canada, there are elections in Uruguay. And of course, legislators are running after all sorts of initiatives. So I wanted to talk to you about how public policies, in order to be successful, have to adapt to this reality that changes all the time. So it seems to be something quite natural to recognize that the assessment, evidence, results that we are obtaining have to be put together with the policies. That would be the way to take. Thank you very much, Julio César Aldana. I would now like to say hello, and I would like to thank the CCA for having invited us. I want to say hello to all my colleagues, to all the Latin American regulators, and I must say hello to the ambassador that is here with us today. The first thing I would have to do is to tell you what I am thinking about. The first thing is that I think the world is learning about cannabis and that our countries are not the exception. Colombia neither, of course. Someone was talking earlier about the regulatory emerging agencies. I don't think there are such agencies. I think all the regulatory agencies are learning from all of this. And that means that I am very happy that this is taking place. I'm very happy to be here. I think it's a great opportunity for me as a director of a regulatory agency in Colombia to come and learn about this. And no doubt I'll have to go to other countries to learn even further. And there is a very important proposal here, proposal for a process of harmonization. I would call it a sanitary harmonization, because all this development, all these companies, initiatives, and the Colombian ones are very important, I must say. We have seen in Colombia companies with developments that are very solid as far as the approval, the appearance of standards that enable the medicinal use of cannabis. So I think that it's very necessary for regulatory agencies to have a sanitary harmonization around that, because we're going to have to have one same language, as they say, as far as how to modulate all this entrepreneurial initiative concerning a product, and we've heard it today, has a use that is not only medicinal, it's recreational as well. So our challenge is to think what are regulatory agencies going to do to facilitate research around cannabis. We can't do anything. The ones who have to have the initiative in research are those in the scientific and academic community, and we as regulatory agencies can't do anything else other than have timely moments to establish units of criteria for this harmonization to enable this research to take place and for the medicinal use of cannabis to become a reality and not a concept that we have in many fora in the world that have a magical side to them. I apologize for talking about this vision of things, but one hears fora where cannabis sometimes promises to cure the public debt of the countries. And no, cannabis cannot have that magical connotation if we want to make of that plant a plant that has medicinal rigor. I think that Colombia has done several steps to respond to the question of standards. I think that the standard that regulated medicinal use of cannabis appeared in 2016. And today in Colombia, the growth of cannabis is regulated. The best practices in agriculture are regulated, and there's an entity of the state that does that, particularly an institute in Colombia called IRCA that has to do with all the agricultural side. There's the regularization of the transformation of cannabis for medicinal use that is regulated in the ministry, and it's going to go to INVIMA in 2 months, in the month of November. And, of course, due to those standards that are very logical, I'd say again, in the region, nowadays in Colombia, any person can request to register a product with chemical synthesis, and like our friends in Brazil said it, they have to go through an approval that will require pharmacological assessment to verify the therapeutical side that the product is alleging. And besides that, we can have phytotherapeutical products with CBD or THC basis. And Colombia has already registered around 300 cosmetic products that are already in the market, and we are hoping this month, before the end of the month of September, to have a guide that will be ready and will enable us. It's called the Best Practices Guide that will enable Colombia to distribute products. This is, in summary, Dr. Ricardo, what we have in legislation in Colombia nowadays. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have... Well, I was saying, can I be heard? I was saying that the first thing that should be clear is that we have not implemented yet a reasonable period of time to make an assessment of the impacts that would enable us to come to conclusions as to this public policy. But we can talk, yes, about certain beginnings. For example, Uruguay has a very long time monitoring concerning the use of different substances and different use templates, and we use this periodical assessment with many cases that the Center of Drugs develops and the Statistics Institute develops. The last field test was done in 2014, so it wouldn't be possible starting that field study to make an assessment of the tendencies or the effects of the new regulation. But during 2018, second semester of last year, we started once again with this survey, which is very important and represent the different urban sites of the country, and the Secretariat of Drugs will soon publish the results. Same thing with the surveys concerning are done every 2 years. So combining these sources of information, besides taking into consideration what is done in universities and research centers, there are things that one can start to see and eventually very carefully present as being the first results of this agenda of changes in public policy. Now, it could be very interesting to underline that one of the goals of our public policy is to have a strong perspective of public health and harm reduction. So there's an intention as far as Uruguay goes, and I'd say again that it's difficult to talk only of the medicinal component of the regulation. We need something balanced that would talk also about adult or recreational use as well. It's interesting to underline that starting the perspective of public health, we can see how products that were distributed through illegal networks in Latin America, mostly Paraguay, provided a low-quality product that was dangerous. And now data start to show that there's a change in preference in users, and one has migrated to natural products like the dry flower, and that seems to be something very important public health-wise. Now, given the fact that to have access to cannabis for recreational usage, the person has to be an adult Uruguayan or a permanent resident, and a visitor cannot have access to cannabis that is regulated, we can also control the process of covering the formal issues through these registrations. People have to choose through which way to arrive to cannabis. Is it through domestic growth or through a club with membership clubs that have up to 45 members, or through a pharmacy. And nowadays there are 50,000 people that have access to cannabis because they registered to be able to do it. So the tendency as far as the registrations go is something that is growing all the time. But we understand that the tendency slowly, people are going to have more and more trust in the administration of this information. There's been no filtering, no technological attack, no hackers. That would be a disaster, of course, as far as the policies go. Now, as far as combating the presence of narco trafficking, drug trafficking, and understanding that in cannabis we cannot regulate cannabis without eliminating drug trafficking, if we focus on how to develop this matter of cannabis, we have made estimations whereby from the beginning of this process, only through legal means, there are $25 million that for Uruguay are a lot, started to be, let's say, administered, and the more solid way would be to say that they were not channeled through criminal ways. And if we control tendencies of use or the perception of risk related to use and negative side effects that it could have, there are data that enable us to show that regulation and sensitization campaigns that have been done help people to take informed decisions. And these are indications that once they are published will be used much better. And of course, to finish with medicinal use, I think that what is clear is that the interest of researchers is growing a lot in this process. In Uruguay, a couple of years ago, an Uruguayan endocannabinoid society was created that is working on this matter. And starting that, there's different university groups that are also creating work that will be included in the curricula of our clinicians, for example. And in that sense, there are good signs, although, like, of course, everywhere, it's a middle and long range. We can do short steps today, yes, but of course, this is long range. That is where we are today.
There is a clear division between CBD and THC. Nevertheless, in the case of Colombia, there is a bid, and if what monitors read correctly, this would be eliminated. Or is this correct or not? Dr. Ricardo, I believe that the world, as I said, is spending around this. So just to use a jargon term, these things move forward and then they move backwards. Everyone's talking about economic benefits around the exploitation of medicinal cannabis use, and we have to focus on something very important, and that's how we temper, standardize, and set up very clear standards for this substance or cannabis to have an impact on public health via its medicinal use. And this standardization implies knowledge of the recreational use of the substance. In the world today, we are used to the fact that people who used marijuana improved his insomnia levels, muscle spasticity, seizures, patients who improved nausea symptoms or vomiting symptoms while undergoing therapy or chemotherapy specifically. So this has to go through clinical trials so that we can measure it and look at its true impact. And to answer your question, this implies that we need to be knowledgeable of the metabolites of the plant, among them CBD, THC, but not only those two, because today we're also talking about other substances that have some sort of a positive impact in the flower that can also have medicinal use. For instance, in Canada, CBD is being carefully looked at. In the US also. In my opinion, legislation must also adapt so that we can precisely know what we're looking for in terms of CBD, what our objective is for THC, what are the levels of THC that will be allowed in a pharmaceutical product. And in general terms also, I think there is nothing engraved in stone. We are all learning about the subject, and we need to move forward, stop, move backwards, and then move forward again. The doctor a while ago said that we still have 20 years to go to learn and to make adjustments. So we should not be worried about legislation right now and standards in countries around CBD and THC. I believe that, if you can give me 20 seconds more to speak, we need to focus on how Latin American countries, and not only Latin American countries, but all the countries that have been moving forward in the right direction, how can we all have a harmonization process so that we can all speak the same language to benefit our main target, that is public health for our people as regulatory agencies? That's our main objective. Thank you very much, Peru. Judy Castañeda, can you please go ahead? Good morning. I apologize for the quality of the sound. Sometimes technology doesn't work well. Our director of the Health and Drug Policy in Peru is also sending greetings from DGMID, the General Director of Medicine Supplies and Drugs, and we're also going to talk about the medicinal use of cannabis. Our law took effect last year in November 2017, and then we developed guidelines published the following year, and today we are in the implementation stage. And we are trying to implement it in the best possible manner. As you are aware, this is a new subject matter for regulatory entities that links many roles with other areas that didn't used to work together regarding the drug. For instance, regarding farming, that didn't used to be linked to drug approval. Our guidelines authorize imports, trade, research, and production via licenses granted by the authorities. In this case, granted by DGMID, or General Directorate of Medicine Supplies and Drugs. We also have national records, also by DGMID, where we have the National Record of Patients, and patients using cannabis derivatives share their information in a confidential manner, and they also receive information regarding uses and recommendations based on scientific evidence. We also have other records provided by supplies. Up to date, we haven't granted this type of licenses. We are at the implementation stage, as I've said. However, in order to guarantee access to cannabis derivatives, because that's the objective of our regulation for medicinal and therapeutic uses, we've granted exceptional authorizations to import cannabis derivatives. These products come in and they are given to patients by means of exceptional authorization. Our regulation also refers to health registration through a plant medication and also as a medicinal product for health uses. As a regulatory entity, our main challenge is control, responsible regulation, and we've also faced challenges regarding legal trade. Not only in terms of cannabis, but also in terms of all other products. But we faced difficulties since these products are being sold in the illegal market. And we are concerned because, as Dr. Mark said in the previous panel regarding quality and efficacy, it's very important to have regulation that's strict enough in these areas to be able to guarantee quality for patients above all. Thank you very much. Without a doubt, there is a boom in the offer of cannabis-related products. You can see it on social media, and you can also see it on fairs and in different spaces of the streets in our cities. Nevertheless, there is no traceability of the compound, and that implies a huge risk. Specifically, in the case of Brazil, when people personally import, how can we do quality control knowing that we are still like walking along a dark alley, to call it somehow? Well, this is a common question in the technical area. How can we control quality? And usually people who import have very complicated health conditions. And of course, we want it to be a safe medication. So to talk about surveillance, control, will guarantee safety. So we need to have drugs with surveillance, with drug surveillance. And we have to focus on this for people to be able to have access to quality drugs controlled with availability, and also meaning that it's not going to worsen their health condition, and it's only going to improve their condition. Alberto, does this also mean that we have to train physicians? Somehow, this implies raising the level of responsibility of the patient, but we also have to empower doctors because there is a lack of scientific literature regarding prescriptions. So how can we close the gap? In Mexico, we have 17 national health institutes. The one focused on cancer has 26 or 28 protocols that it's presented to COFEPRIS, that's similar to INVIMA in Colombia, to assess its impact on pain, nausea, tumor reduction, weight assessments, also focusing on how it triggers hunger and the opposite. We haven't been able to move forward with these protocols because we don't have legislation for cannabis. With the new law, we want to have a section for research to fundraise research and to show progress and to be able to have timely reports for regulators, for instance, to know how much THC a substance or a drug can have. Originally, regulation was proposed with 1% THC on 1,000 milliliters of water, for instance. And how much is that? Is that a lot or is that a little? I weigh 110 kilograms. Well, that's what I weighed this morning. And my friend probably weighs 60 kilograms, right? Hopefully. But the percentage of THC will have a different impact on each one of us. So these assessments have to be discussed. We cannot just say that this is going to be the standard today, but finally we have to find out how much this is actually. Now, regarding edibles, we don't want THC. If there's THC, it's because there's a health regulation of psychotropic substances or of elements that counteract the psychotropic impact on the body. If THC is not there, then we have to say that hemp is a myth. At the end of the day, to avoid hemp regulation is the same thing. It was called hemp, but still cannabis plant. But to say that, well, it's cannabis, but we call it hemp, is just trying to turn around the main discussion. And we still need to move forward on these discussions. Now, the debate regarding adults. Well, we're not talking about recreational use. We're talking about adult use. So whoever is of age and wants to do it should do so. However, for minors, minors have to be protected by the state. Therefore, we have to differentiate who can have access or who cannot have access. Talking about drugs. And in terms of pharmacology, we need regulation also. And of course, this implies training physicians, knowledge of pharmacology, and via pharmacopoeia to know what can or cannot be used. In your way, do you have an assessment method for registered products that are already being distributed for medicinal purposes? And have you received complaints or claims from users? In your way, what's been clear in the regulatory framework is that what we call adult use or medicinal use are two separate tracks. So household cultivation, to be members or clubs, or to buy it or distribute it for adult consumption have different sets of rules. For instance, companies with licenses to sell at pharmacies farm in public land managed by our institute with safety guaranteed by national police. In that plot of land, they have a parcel with their own security system, and there they can do the procedure we've approved. And of course, there's traceability from the seed. I'm talking about adult use, from the seed to the cannabis user. That allows us to know exactly where the package is, what lot it comes from, the exact cannabinoid profile, and the technical controls of heavy metals, pesticides, humidity performed on all batches before selling it in the market. That's regarding adult consumption. In Uruguay, we're still assessing, and we're going to grant 3 new licenses to install new companies in that same plot of land in order to supply the market so that we can better cover or so that we can have a better coverage in the formal sector. Regarding medicinal use, we have a very different scheme. So for adult use, they have an independent productive structure, so they cannot supply their medicinal use or their labs for medicinal use, and they cannot export. So the legislation in Uruguay does not allow to export cannabis or cannabis derivatives for non-medicinal use that are not linked to scientific research. In the terms of research, there are other sets of rules that are more permissive. For instance, they can provide a place for their facilities, and then we can assess, for instance, if it's an urban or rural area, what the security conditions or environmental conditions are, elements that can allow us to know if this is an adequate location for this project. But then together with the Ministry of Health, we can enable the company so that it can be suited for medicinal production. So they need to comply with certain standards set up by the Ministry of Health that are similar to the industry. And then the products that are sold in the market for medicinal or cosmetic uses also have to comply with this set of assessments that are the traditional ones for the pharmaceutical industry. That's what we use in Uruguay. And in Uruguay, we have not authorized the use of plants or drinks or edibles for adult use. We are focused on the dry flower, and that's how we supply users. And regarding medicinal, as I've said, we are in expansion, identifying alternatives for new products so that companies that are set up in Uruguay can also identify the possibility to supply a small market like ours. We must not forget that we have a population of 3.5 million inhabitants, and the dynamics and the demand of the private sector to produce in the medicinal purposes surpasses the interests of supply in Uruguay. Of course, these companies are looking towards foreign trade. And what my colleague from Colombia said is very interesting. There is a lot to be done in terms of calling similar things in a similar way, setting up controls for things that we've already analyzed, and to find paths for innovative things that do not fit into the international regulation we currently have. For instance, one product can be registered and sold as a medication in one country, and in another country it can be an over-the-counter product that is being sold as an edible. So within this framework, this could affect harmonic growth, as we said before. And from the panel of the Caribbean, I want to refer to banking, right? And this affects the entire production chain, especially in countries such as Uruguay, where local banks work closely with American banks, and they determine their action plans. And there is a paradox, because in the regulatory model in Uruguay took steps to fight against organized crime, to fight against money laundering, and to define a control protocol on this emerging industry. However, difficulty of access to financial systems affects the industry, and then the price is very expensive, or they have to set up subsidiaries in other countries to be able to collect money in those countries. And these countries have solved this financial problem, but there are other countries that have not been able to do so. So there is an imbalance, and this is the reason why it is very hard to set up common rules for the game for everyone. One of the possible dangers in the sector is that, given the regulatory circumstances, we build like a parallel or illegal market, if you can call it so, of products that can promise wonders without basis. And this can happen a lot in the world of social media. And it is a very feasible possibility. How can we fight against this? For instance, in the case of Colombia, you already have 300 cosmetic products approved. Can there be something with a different purpose that can be used as a replacement for medicinal purposes without adequate scientific evidence to support so? The problem of digital platforms is not only a problem of emerging or developing countries. It's a problem of developed countries. And that's a reality around the world today. And of course, marketing and sale of these cannabis-based products are not exempt of this connotation of illegality. Colombia cannot suddenly have a policeman at each corner of each municipality or each district in the country. What do we believe is the antidote against illegality? Strictness. When you visit countries such as Canada that have advanced a lot, and I want to congratulate the private sector in Colombia also, we've seen that the efforts in Colombia have been very strict. Farming practices, medicinal use of cannabis has a very important component of farming, and this comes from the best farming practices. So in Canada, you can see how this is being managed. I was lucky enough to look at it yesterday, and most likely tomorrow I'll be able to do so again because I'm going to visit another company and another initiative. And since I know the ones in Colombia, actually in Colombia, one of these companies is certified in best manufacturing practices, among other things. Not only they've advanced in their agricultural side, but also in the side of transformation. And I believe that this is antidote, strictness, so that by being strict on both the farming and transformation side, as long as we keep regulating clinical trials, and as long as we get rid of this magical connotation, we can then send a clear message towards consumers. Because as regulators, we must not forget that our purpose is to keep public health. We must promote and protect public health. How? By promoting adequate use of these type of products. I believe that the message is no different from the original one. I don't know what my panel colleagues think about this, but this illegality is dangerous. But we cannot just scream at it or push it around. We just have to have a strict system, and this has to be a joint effort that has to come from private entities, and regulators have to control it and moderate it. And of course, we need to have governments with clear purpose on public policy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Castañeda in Lima. Please tell us, based on the regulation that came out this year, how has the practical experience been concerning this regulation? How was it accepted by the community? Patients, the public, or the medical community? Well, to start, I would like to tell you that we are at the stage of implementation, but we have had, yes, many comments, many consultations around this regulation. For example, on the side of patients, we have had a response by which they have registered in our databases. They're very interested in using those products to be able to use these products, but they have to be quality products. Now, as to health professionals, on their part, there's also a lot of interest as far as looking for information, developing their knowledge to be able to have use of those products, in which pathologies, for example, but there must be studies for that. They have to have evidence for that. Now, on the side of the industry, we've had many consultations, and we're applying our standards for pharmaceutical products that the industry knows, right? But there's also lots of doubts around this, mostly in reference to technological development. Because to be able for it to be a lab, there must be quality control studies, there must be analysis as how it's going to be made. So really, we have a lot of expectations, and there are certain labs that have already been created as drug labs that will help us to have the product in our country. Now, as to regulatory authorities, we're working in coordination with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, each ministry having its own mandates, like the colleague said, say the colleague of Colombia, the one of Uruguay. This is a team work, not only as far as regulations go, but the four pillars as well: patients, professionals, the industry, and the regulators. We want these products to be quality products, to be efficient. We don't want illegal trade. And as users as well. So our regulation is focused on that as what? As a Ministry of Health, we're going to do a follow-up as far as pharmacosurveillance, for example. As I told you earlier, we are giving exceptional authorizations for patients to have access to those products. And we are facing illegal trade, and that is a very big challenge that is a very high priority for us. We don't have the product in the market, right? So we are facing illegal trade in all fronts: the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Health as well. Thank you very much. We have a question from the audience. The interpreter apologizes. She cannot hear the question. Without the microphone, Ms. Castañeda will not be able to hear you. Okay. Hello, I'm from Peru. Hello, Judy. I'm Francesca. I don't know if you can see me. Hi, Francesca. How are you? I feel I could talk a bit about law in Peru because I've worked as civil society. Last May, we attempted to establish a regulation, and I think that what's not clear is that the regulation is very good in Peru, and I would like to congratulate Peru because we are open for cannabis, and we've enabled to include psychoactive, non-psychoactive products, and we want it for 4 disorders. The doctor can prescribe it for any treatment, but the insurance will only cover it in 4 illnesses. All of this obviously implied lots of battles, lots of verbal fights, but the usage for health is enormously important. We patients use the oils, the flowers, vaporization is allowed, so things are not regulated completely yet. We hope to arrive to that point. And we were talking about obstacles as patients. We all have obstacles. The law is incomplete because we cannot make personal growth, only lab growth. And now that the law is not implemented yet and the periods of time have passed already, we do not have a legal way now to have access to our medication. And one thing obviously would be, yes, to have regulation, but no prohibition. And when there's many obstacles, of course, there's over-regulation, and patients will use the parallel market. So we want to go to the formal market as patients, and we have to get rid of obstacles and to strengthen the goal of law, which is access to medication. So I wanted to ask Judy as well, on a personal level, when will these dispositions be there? Because there are parallel markets, and we want an option to start, of course. Please, Judy. Yes, well, indeed, we have worked with Francesca on several occasions on projects, and as I said, we're in a stage of implementation. It's already the final phase. The standard documents have been completed in their majority. There are certain issues, I imagine, like in other countries, in other regulatory authorities, mostly to be able to work in coordination, because this is a process, a chain that goes from growing the product to manufacturing it and to put it in the market at the end, right? So there's different parties that intervene here, and we who are the regulatory authority have difficulties to be able to conclude the documents with the standards. We don't want any collision, and that is why we have worked as a team in all the different fields. And soon we will be publishing to be able to authorize the licenses, to be able to put our products in the market. Thank you very much. Okay, our time has come to an end. I'm going to ask you one question. How much time do we have here? Well, I can ask you one final question. The regulators, what is your plan of work for the next 12 months? Supposing that in 1 year we're invited again to Toronto, what do you expect to tell the public, the audience, as to what happened during the previous 12 months? We will talk about the way we've established things and to work on approval. The process is still open, so we don't have such a long scenario to work. Things are going to take time. We want clear regulations that are clearer in this matter. There's a mandate at court that establishes periods of time for individual and collective growth of cannabis. This period of time ends October the 24th. And the mandate establishes for the Congress to look at the 5 articles of law, of the Law of Health, the Health Act, concerning recreational use of cannabis. At the same time, in the matter of right to health and what that means. So this year, The legislative period ends in December. There must be a law concerning cannabis. And this cannabis law wants to create a Mexican Institute for the Regulation of Cannabis. And as such, times are 90, 180 days for implementation, which means that in May of 2020, it will be operating. And we need another 6 months to deal with regulations. So in 1 year, I estimate that we will go through processes that will enable us to have a regulatory body in Mexico already, and we have to guarantee the right for patients that have been demanding legal access to cannabis, with children that suffer from epilepsy and that could lead a normal life otherwise. So for all of them, there's going to be standardized and accelerated process of research, an expedited process for them to be able to use the product. And there are also amnesty processes in Mexico for people who will be able to come out of prison at some point. People who have been connected to organized crime, violent acts, no, but rather people who were victims of the matter of regulation. So in 1 year, I think that in the Institute there will be protocols of research, there will be a more regulated market, and a sanitary process that will be far more efficient than what we have today. Martin. More than anything, in Uruguay, we're working a lot on defining a strategic plan and to have operational plans on a yearly basis. We have the expectation to finish this in 1 year. There are different steps in the standards chain. And we are assessing today new companies to enter the local market for recreational use. And in 1 year, all of this has to be installed, and the companies must be already developing their production. We are very interested in being able to do something with the interest of certain companies for medicinal use of cannabis in our country, of course. That implies the export of cannabis from our country with different destinations. And for now, they're talking, and they've done a few little exportations to Australia, US, and Canada. But this is changing so much that no doubt there will be more opportunities soon. And I would really love in 1 year to have resolved the matter of the financing issue in Uruguay. I think I've said that before as well. And there is no doubt that in this logic of regulation, to connect to research, to the creation of evidence, and to be able to publish all of that before the year ends. To have reports concerning the last surveys, concerning monitoring, and to have best practices for consumption and access to cannabis and its different uses. All of this is fundamental for this policy. Now, at the same time, certain things could seem like not important, but they are. In our country, for example, no local growth is allowed for the vaporization of herbs. And that is because of a strong standard against tobacco that doesn't enable the manufacture of different electronic devices to use tobacco. that is blocking the entry of vaporizers, and I think that we have to do something like concerning the matter for patients, for example, that would, for example, register for herbal products, and for them to be able to have access to that product for medicinal purposes. So we say it a lot. Everything is related to everything. Everything is connected to the control board. Everything's going to affect what we're doing, and therefore we have to have a systemic vision and to have a strategic attitude to everything, short and long term. Julio Cesar? I think that we must continue to learn from what the world is learning, from what we are learning around this. We have to finish regulating a norm, a standard that seems logical in Colombia. Today, I repeat, we can already obtain licenses based on medications, psychotherapeutic and cosmetic products, and let's hope that this year we can have in Colombia the possibility to trade products on fundamental basis. As regulatory entities, we have to deal with all the initiatives around clinical trials that will give far more rigor to this industry, thinking always about being focused on the matter of public health. And we should use this opportunity, this scenario, to see how we can create harmonization efforts in the continent. Thank you very much. Judy, could you say what your plan is for this coming year? I think Judy is not here anymore then. I will thank our panelists and you for your attention, and my congratulations to you all.